those of you who don't know, it's kind of a vampire romance book. And I read it sort of right after Twilight came out, and I wasn't ever really into that stuff, and someone else made me read it. And so I was like, I don't know if I'm even gonna like this. And she breaks a lot of writing rules in that book. She kind of is just explaining stuff as she goes along instead of setting stuff up in advance. She'll be like, oh yeah, by the way, this character's dad is a famous wizard, right when it comes into play. Stuff like that I would never recommend anyone do. But she's so good at what she does, and I think a big part of it is that she's able to make it flow. Every sentence flows into the next. You're so compelled by the world, you're so compelled by the characters that I did not care. Even though as I was reading, I'm like, she's done this is wrong, but she's just so good at what she does, it doesn't even matter.
Yeah. I just read them, and this is a real guilty pleasure. I read James Patterson's Dune, which is not excessively well written, and towards the end he makes this large assertion about the way Friedberg's work, and just looking, I don't think so, that there is a climate of expectation, and if you like the expectations that he is feeding you, you know that there are going to be more, and that's really good. The particular expectation is that people are going to be eaten by rats and dogs and caged buffalo, for goodness sake. And you know, if you like this sort of thing, he's basically tacking up a thing saying, you like this, you're gonna get more, which is a form of immersion as itself. And I think something that a particular kind of women's writing, and I hate to use the word women's writing since it's a slang against women, but never mind, a particular kind of women's writing, and also a particular kind of guy writing gives you as a lure. Yeah.
In trying to write something that you want or intend to be immersive, how important do you think it is to have your reader in general or even a specific reader in mind as you're writing?
I think, personally, I think you should write the story that you would love to read, because there is no perfect reader. You can never please every person out there. Write the story that you would love to read, and there will be readers who will enjoy that. That's how I approach it, because I don't think there is such a thing as writing for the perfect reader.
I agree, and it can come off as pandering. I feel like a reader can also tell when you're sort of trying to appease them. So it's not something I would really do unless you know your audience really, really well. Like with children specifically, if you're someone who is around children all the time, and maybe you've been an elementary school teacher for several years, and you really know kids' heads. Maybe you could do it, but even then, I would be wary.
Yeah, there is a kind of reader expectation that you have to be sensitive to. And if you set a story in New York, you should have some New York details, because that's what people grew from. And I just finished this book about Titanic, and I had to put a scene in that was basically labeled, "This is where they look at Titanic," because people like to see Titanic. And you try and do it in as interesting and non-cliched a way as possible. That those are the scènes the scenes you've got to do.
I think when I'm thinking about my project right now, that for me the most important thing is staying true to the characters and the story that I want to tell. But it's a YA book, and so I have things in mind. And I want the pacing to be, faster rather than slower. I want there to be romance. That's because it matters to me, because it's a pure story and it's pure characters and gender-queer characters. And so I believe that visibility needs to be out there. And so there's thought behind it, but it's not trying to please someone. It's sort of like what you were saying about what you would love to read. But really, I think being true to the story first is really important.
Originally posed a question to your other panelists as to what might be common attributes of immersive stories. And I wanted to, as I was thinking about it, so one might be that it doesn't generate mental dissonance for the reader. So, for example, I'm not sure that you know, first of all, there's the real basics of if you make things which seem to be very implausible in your plot or your character, then people aren't going to be rushing to say, wait a minute, you're reading a book, that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't happen.
But there are certain types of fiction where that is actually what you're trying to do. Like you're trying to create a sense of implausibility, a sense of strangeness, a sense of reality.
Resolve and ambiguity.
Not necessarily.
But I think I know that you're saying that you're looking for a situation in which the reader gives him or herself completely to the story and doesn't debate internally about what's happening.
Isn't that the definition of immersion now? I mean,
Yeah.
you're saying that you don't have dissonance from the text. And what I was saying earlier is that what gives me dissonance is not the same that would give the same type of, like someone else may enjoy it.
I wasn't defining what gives the mental distance. I'm just saying, well, here's an attribute, no matter that readers might agree with, and authors might agree with. How one gets to that.
Right.
And as a writer, I think it's very interesting to work on controlling your reader's relationship with the text, because there are times when you want the reader to step back and say, whoa, I'm comparing two things here, I'm thinking, I'm being complex, and then there are times when you simply want the reader to give partners to what's happening in that particular part of the book.
Kevin, I think it's sort of a lower qualification, but just simply that if you can't stick with the book, you can't read it. I mean, and that's what they're reader to reader. And
one thing nobody has talked about, but I think you have referred to it. Beautifully thoughtfully chosen words create sense of whatever.
And I think that's again what we sort of started this panel talking about too, the subjectivity of it. What that's going to be her pleasure, the way authors use certain words. Whereas for someone else, it might completely be a plot that there's an action. Yeah. Well, yeah,
But it's
true, but I mean, Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code, I think a lot of people would say it's a really immersive book. But, a lot of people would also say, exactly, but it's totally subjective.
that he has. And it's interesting to look when you look at the pleasures you want to give as a writer, that you want to take as a reader. Everybody has a tool basket of stuff. And Dan Brown can tell a story where the scenes keep settling, one after another, chunk like this. And he's really good at doing that. Of course, they jump out of the airplane and they fed through the glass ceiling and they're fine, and you're rolling on the floor laughing, which is a kind of loud version. That
Go around and laugh. Some people would be like, oh my God, I need to know what happens next.
this is amazing. This is amazing. How did they do that? Well, ignored the recommendations of physics. And other people have in their toolbox words. Shakespeare's toolbox is half good as being able to create great words, great sentences, great phrases. And as a reader, I think you need to know where your slats are, where the tabs fit in.
I can
Go ahead.
Oh, just for me reading, when I feel like I'm in the hands of someone who writes beautiful prose, I feel like I can relax. I feel like, or just I'm in very capable hands. It's the difference if I was reading a Louise Erdrich book, The Small, and also Deborah Deborah Harkness for fun discovered, which is, but when I'm reading Terry Pratchett or Researcher, I feel like I'm met as a master. It's just all the elements of craft are there and they're not in very unique and original ways. And for me, then I can relax into it. That's one of my favorite universe, whereas Harkness, it's harder for me. Well, yeah, I feel embarrassed like mentioning it here.
Have you found over time, like your idea of what is immersive has changed? I sometimes go back to describing some of the things I loved when I was younger and discover that some still work for me. Like I get lost in body what is the first 3 words, but I tried rereading Narnia recently and went, wow, this was better when I was younger. This is not the world that I could fall back into. So
I think we're a lot more forgiving when we're younger.
Yeah, absolutely,
We
absolutely.
read a lot of stuff that the so-called stuck fairies, you go back, you reread something, and you're like, this wasn't as good as I remember.
I made the mistake of rereading the Martian Chronicles as an adult, and that was a book that I treasured as a child. And then as an adult, I'm like, no, I don't want to read the rest of this because I don't want my memory to be spoiled. And I wasn't loving it, and I still feel bad about that because I loved it so much. I might have reread that book more than anything else.
I think it's worth the risk.
Oh dear, yes.
I think it can be worth the risk though, because when I've gone back and read that things, you can find intelligence and delight in the text that you didn't see as a child, so it's risky. I think it's risky. Yeah, it's risky, but you can have rewards.
And sometimes as a writer, the immersiveness is, how did they do it? How did they make this so beautiful? I have to go back and read it again.
or also maybe like find the things that informed your voice that you didn't realize were informing your voice until you go back and read it. And I believe that's part of the Narnia for me is I didn't go on to fantasy writer. I wanted to become a don't describe me as red guy in the class and fiction writer for August. So it works great.
I think we've got time for maybe one more. It's okay, maybe we've got time for 2 more. Yeah.
When it comes to being immersion without complex subjects in science fiction, I know there's a lot of such constantly happening on this like very complex. And trying to keep the flow of the story going while you're trying to work that in is kind of difficult.
Well, there's a so-called info dump, information dump, right? So, one of my friends, a very good writer, Richard Bowes, said people read hard science fiction for the info dump. And it's interesting because depending on where you are on the genre spectrum, people are more tolerant of those types of things. I've learned that generally info dumps are bad, although I still sometimes put them in my fiction because you need to convey this information.
And sometimes they're unavoidable, but I would say unless you're writing hard sci-fi and you actually really need to explain these concepts, I would avoid them. And I can also just try breaking them up over the course of the book so that it's not all at once, or just trying to weave them in more naturally to the book, trying to show instead of tell. I don't know how many people have seen the movie Dark City, but I feel like that does a really good job of explaining the world because I don't want to go into the plot, but basically you see the details of this world a few times before it's explained, and so by the time they explain it, you kind of already know, and they don't really have to go into depth.
Yeah, so you can get like hint here, hint there, and then you create an expectation, I would like to know more about this, and then you bring in your right kind of info dump, and people are glad to see it. And I was so pleased when I realized that in that particular thing I was just working on, I could have a huge info dump and people would like it because I'd had other big questions in the book earlier. But every book has a different way of wanting to tell its story. Every short story has a different way of wanting to be told. Last question? Yeah.
Let me agree with this, but one thing I do, particularly writing for adults, when trying to evoke a sense of wonder or a sense of terror or a sense of whatever, as a bridge to that, I think trying to appeal to like the senses. It seems to me no matter what age you're at, if you're in a setting where you can feel and smell the air, you're seeing things, you're hearing things, that's going to strike you on a very primal level first, and that acts as a bridge to.
That's a very good point.
Yes. Particularly not just sight, but smell and sound. Yeah. I mean, I can smell 100 years of solitude. Can you?